In 48 BC, the most powerful man in the Roman world jumped off a burning ship into the harbor of Alexandria. He was 52 years old. He was in a foreign country. His enemy controlled the city. He was swimming for his life, holding state documents above his head to keep them dry, while his ships burned behind him. That man was Julius Caesar. And what happened to him in Africa, in Egypt, in Alexandria, on the Nile, in the deserts of North Africa, is the chapter of his story that almost nobody knows. He came to Africa chasing a rival. He found a queen. He found a war. He found the most dangerous city in the ancient world. And he nearly didn't make it out alive. This is the African chapter of Julius Caesar. Before Africa, who was Julius Caesar? Gaius Julius Caesar was born in Rome around 100 BC into a patrician family of ancient lineage but modest current wealth. The Julian family claimed descent from the goddess Venus herself, a claim Caesar would use politically his entire life. He was not born into power. He clawed his way toward it. As a young man, he was captured by pirates in the Aegean Sea. He spent his captivity cheerfully socializing with his captors, while quietly promising to return and crucify every single one of them. When his ransom was paid and he was released, he did exactly that. That story tells you everything about Julius Caesar. Charming, patient, completely without mercy when crossed. He rose through Roman politics, serving as a military officer, as a priest, as a magistrate, building alliances, accumulating debts and favors simultaneously. By his 40s, he was one of the three most powerful men in Rome. By 60 BC, Rome was being torn apart. The Republic, the system of elected magistrates and senatorial governance that had run Rome for centuries, was cracking under the weight of its own success. Rome now controlled an empire stretching from Spain to the Middle East. Managing that empire through a system designed for a city-state was impossible. Into this crisis stepped three men. Julius Caesar, the brilliant, ambitious politician and general. Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated military commander, conqueror of the East. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. Together, they formed the first triumvirate, an unofficial power-sharing arrangement that effectively ran Rome between them. Caesar used the arrangement to get what he wanted, command of the Roman armies in Gaul. What followed was 8 years of military campaigning that transformed Caesar from a powerful politician into something unprecedented. A general with an army that was personally loyal to him. Not to Rome, not to the Senate, to Caesar. From 58 to 50 BC, Caesar fought the Gallic Wars. He conquered what is now modern France, Belgium, parts of Switzerland and Germany, and twice invaded Britain. He fought over 50 battles. He enslaved over 1 million people. He killed, by ancient estimates, another million. He wrote about it himself in the Gallic Wars, a work of military history and political self-promotion so brilliantly written that it is still used to teach Latin today. The Gallic Wars made Caesar three things. Fabulously wealthy, from the plunder of conquered territories. Militarily invincible, in the eyes of his soldiers and the Roman public. And politically dangerous in the eyes of the Roman Senate. When his term of command ended, the Senate ordered him to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar made a different choice. In January 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon River, the legal boundary between his province and Italy, with his army. Civil war began. The Roman Civil War between Caesar and Pompey was one of the defining conflicts of the ancient world. Pompey, backed by the Senate, controlled the east and the sea. Caesar moved with the terrifying speed that had made him legendary in Gaul. Within 60 days of crossing the Rubicon, Caesar controlled all of Italy without fighting a single major battle. Pompey fled to Greece, then to the east, gathering his forces. The two armies finally clashed at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece in August 48 BC. Caesar had fewer men. He won anyway. Pompey fled the battlefield, his army shattered, his political support collapsing. He needed a refuge, a place to regroup, find resources, rebuild. He chose Egypt. Egypt was the wealthiest kingdom in the Mediterranean world. Its rulers had a treaty of friendship with Rome. Surely they would help Rome's greatest general. He was wrong. When Pompey's fleet arrived off the Egyptian coast near Pelusium in September 48 BC, the situation in Egypt was complicated. Egypt was in the middle of its own civil war. The young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, barely 13 years old, and his older sister Cleopatra VII were fighting each other for the Egyptian throne. Cleopatra had been driven out of Alexandria by her brother's advisors. Ptolemy's court was controlled by three powerful men: the eunuch Pothinus, the general Achilles, and the rhetorician Theodotus. When Pompey sent a message asking for Egyptian asylum, these three men debated what to do. Their calculation was cold and pragmatic. Pompey had lost. Caesar was coming. If they sheltered Pompey, Caesar would be their enemy. If they killed Pompey and presented Caesar with the evidence, perhaps Caesar would be grateful. Theodotus reportedly summarized the logic with a phrase that has echoed through history: "Dead men don't bite." A small boat was sent to bring Pompey ashore. He was stabbed to death before he reached the beach. His head was cut off and preserved. Caesar arrived in Alexandria 4 days after Pompey's murder. He came with only 2 legions, approximately 4,000 men, a small force for a man entering a foreign kingdom in the middle of a civil war. He was met by Theodotus, who presented him with Pompey's severed head and signet ring. Caesar reportedly wept. Whether the tears were genuine grief for an old ally turned enemy or political theater, historians have debated ever since. What is clear is that Caesar did not react with the gratitude Theodotus had anticipated. He was offended. Pompey was a Roman, a consul, a man who had celebrated 3 triumphs and been called the Great. Whatever had happened between them, Pompey deserved a Roman death, not to be butchered on a beach by Egyptian courtiers calculating their political advantage. Caesar had Pompey's head properly buried with Roman religious rites. Then he looked at the situation in Alexandria and made a decision that would nearly kill him. He stayed. Alexandria in 48 BC was the greatest city in the world. Rome was larger, but Alexandria was more extraordinary. Founded by Alexander the Great in 331 BC, it had been built as a deliberate exercise in creating the perfect city. Wide straight streets on a grid pattern, a deep natural harbor, the great lighthouse of Alexandria, the Pharos, standing over 100 meters tall and visible 50 miles out to sea, and the Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of human knowledge in the ancient world, housing an estimated 400,000 to 700,000 scrolls. Works of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, history, and literature from every civilization the Greeks had encountered. The library employed the greatest scholars of the ancient world. Euclid worked there. Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth, was its chief librarian. Caesar walked into this city as a visitor with a small military escort. The city was beautiful, sophisticated, and extremely dangerous. Caesar immediately inserted himself into Egypt's royal dispute. As a creditor, Egypt owed Rome a substantial debt from when Ptolemy XII, father of both Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra, had paid Rome to recognize his rule. Caesar declared he had legal standing to arbitrate between the siblings. He summoned both Ptolemy XIII and Cleopatra to appear before him in Alexandria. Ptolemy's advisors controlled the young king and the city. Cleopatra was in exile outside Alexandria with an army, unable to enter the city without being killed. She needed to reach Caesar. What happened next became one of the most famous moments in ancient history. Though the famous rolled in a carpet story comes from the ancient writer Plutarch, who wrote over a century after the event, the core fact is recorded in multiple sources. Cleopatra arranged to be smuggled into the royal palace past her brother's guards. She reached Caesar's private chambers. By morning, everything had changed. Cleopatra VII was approximately 21 years old when she met Caesar. She was not the blonde Hollywood figure of popular imagination. She was a Macedonian Greek by descent, the last of the Ptolemaic dynasty founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals. Ancient sources describe her as extraordinarily charismatic, with a voice like a musical instrument, capable of speaking 9 languages, deeply educated in mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. She was the first ruler of her dynasty to actually bother learning the Egyptian language. Caesar was 52, battle-hardened, brilliantly intelligent, one of the best-read men in Rome. Two of the most remarkable individuals of the ancient world, meeting in a palace bedroom in the most sophisticated city on earth. Whatever passed between them that night was political, personal, and consequential. Caesar decided to support Cleopatra's claim to the Egyptian throne. Ptolemy XII's advisors decided that Caesar had to die. Ptolemy's general Achillas marched on Alexandria with approximately 20,000 soldiers. Caesar had roughly 4,000 men. He was surrounded in the royal palace quarter of Alexandria, a peninsula jutting into the harbor, defensible but isolated. He sent urgent messages to his allies requesting reinforcements. He commandeered the royal fleet in the harbor to prevent Achillas from using it. And then he did something that has haunted historians ever since. He ordered the fleet, or at least part of it, burned to prevent it falling into enemy hands. The fire spread. Ancient sources describe flames reaching the library of Alexandria. Whether this caused significant damage to the library, destroyed it partially or entirely, or merely burned warehouses near the harbor containing books awaiting shipment, the sources disagree and the debate continues among historians to this day. What is certain is that fire burned in Alexandria's harbor, and Caesar was now trapped in a city whose population was turning against him. The Alexandrian War, as it came to be known, was unlike any conflict Caesar had previously fought. In Gaul, he had commanded massive set-piece battles across open terrain. He had built enormous siege works. He had maneuvered armies across hundreds of miles. In Alexandria, he was fighting street by street through a dense urban environment with a fraction of his usual forces. The Alexandrians were ferocious urban fighters, using the city's architecture against Caesar's legions, building barricades, fighting from rooftops and windows. Caesar's men had to fight for every street, every building, every intersection. He held the palace. He held the harbor mole, the great stone jetty protecting the harbor entrance. He held the island of Pharos where the lighthouse stood. But he was under constant attack. And then Ptolemy XII's advisors made a move that complicated everything further. They released Caesar's greatest political enemy within the royal family. Arsinoe, Cleopatra's younger sister, escaped from the palace and joined the Egyptian forces outside. Now Caesar had enemies on all sides. The critical moment of the Alexandrian War came in the harbor. Caesar's forces held the Pharos lighthouse island, essential for controlling the harbor entrance and keeping his supply lines open. The Egyptian forces attacked the mole connecting Pharos to the mainland. Caesar went to the mole personally, leading the defense himself rather than directing from safety. The Egyptian assault was overwhelming. Caesar's forces were pushed back. The mole was lost. Soldiers were cut off. In the chaos, Caesar jumped into the harbor. He was in full armor. The water was deep. The distance to safety was significant. Ancient sources describe him swimming with one hand, holding documents, and his purple general's cloak above the water with the other to keep them dry. Whether this specific detail is accurate or embellished, the core fact is clear. Julius Caesar, 52 years old, in full armor, swam for his life through the harbor of Alexandria while soldiers died around him. He made it to a boat. The battle continued. Caesar's urgent messages had reached his allies. Reinforcements were coming from multiple directions. Most significantly, a force commanded by Mithridates of Pergamon marched overland from Syria, crossing the Sinai Desert into Egypt. This force included Jewish troops provided by the ruler Antipater of Judea, the father of the man who would later be known as Herod the Great. The arrival of this relief force changed everything. Caesar broke out of Alexandria to link up with Mithridates. The two forces combined and moved against Ptolemy XI's army. The decisive battle was fought at the Nile Delta, a location where Caesar's superior tactical ability could finally be brought to bear. The Egyptian army was defeated. Ptolemy XIII, the 13-year-old pharaoh whose advisors had started this entire crisis by murdering Pompey, fled the battlefield and drowned in the Nile. Whether he drowned accidentally during the retreat or was killed by his own people, the sources do not agree. He was never seen again. Caesar returned to Alexandria victorious. Arsinoe, Cleopatra's sister who had defected to the enemy, was captured and would later be taken to Rome as a prisoner. Cleopatra was established as Queen of Egypt, co-ruling nominally with her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, as Egyptian tradition required a female ruler to have a male co-regent. But there was no question who actually held power. Cleopatra, backed by Caesar's legions, was Queen of Egypt, and Caesar stayed. For months, this decision puzzled and frustrated his allies in Rome. Caesar was needed in the wider world. The civil war was not over. Pompey's supporters were regrouping in North Africa. There were battles to be fought, a Roman world to be reorganized. Instead, Caesar remained in Alexandria. He and Cleopatra sailed together up the Nile on a royal barge, accompanied by 400 ships, traveling deep into Egypt. He was seeing the country, learning it, being seen with its queen, and Cleopatra was pregnant. The journey up the Nile with Cleopatra was unlike anything Caesar had experienced. He was one of the most traveled men in the ancient world. He had campaigned in Spain, Gaul, Britain, Greece, Asia Minor. But Egypt was different. The Nile itself was unlike any river in the Roman world, a single green thread through absolute desert, with the richest agricultural land in the ancient world compressed into a narrow strip on each bank. The temples were ancient beyond Roman comprehension. Rome was perhaps 700 years old. The temples Caesar sailed past had been standing for 2,000 years. The Sphinx had already been ancient for 2,000 years. Egypt's antiquity was staggering even to a Roman who considered Rome the center of civilization. Ancient sources suggest Caesar wanted to sail all the way to the source of the Nile, a geographical mystery that fascinated the ancient world. His soldiers refused to go further. He turned back, but the journey had given him something no Roman general had possessed before: a direct, personal understanding of Egypt, the wealthiest territory in the Mediterranean. Caesar left Egypt in the spring of 47 BC. Cleopatra was pregnant with his child. He left her 3 legions to secure her position, a significant military commitment that demonstrated how seriously he took Egypt's strategic importance. He would not return to Egypt, but Egypt and Cleopatra would come to him. The son Cleopatra bore, named Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar, was brought to Rome when Cleopatra visited years later. Caesar never formally acknowledged the boy as his heir. He had no legitimate Roman children, and his chosen heir was his great-nephew Octavian. But he did not deny the child either. Caesarion would survive his father by 14 years, before being hunted down and killed by Octavian after Cleopatra's death, the last of the Ptolemaic line. But before any of that, Caesar had a war to finish. He left Egypt and turned his attention to the east, then to North Africa, where Pompey's supporters had built a new army, and where the sands of Africa were about to swallow Roman legions whole. While Caesar had been occupied in Egypt, the remnants of the Pompeian faction had been busy. In the Roman province of Africa, roughly modern Tunisia, a powerful coalition had assembled. Metellus Scipio, Pompey's father-in-law, commanded a large Roman army. Titus Labienus, once Caesar's most trusted general in Gaul, who had defected to Pompey, was there with his cavalry. And most dangerously, they had the support of King Juba I of Numidia. Numidia was the powerful North African kingdom occupying modern Algeria. Its cavalry were among the finest in the ancient world, fast, mobile, experienced desert fighters. Juba brought 4 legions of his own troops and a force of war elephants. The coalition army was substantial, perhaps 70,000 men combined. Caesar needed to destroy it to end the civil war definitively. He landed in North Africa in December 47 BC with an initially small force, his supplies disrupted, his cavalry delayed, his position precarious. The African campaign was about to test him as severely as Alexandria had. Caesar's North African campaign began badly. His landing was chaotic. He stumbled as he came ashore, which Roman soldiers considered a terrible omen. With characteristic presence of mind, Caesar embraced the earth with both hands and declared he had taken Africa in his grasp. His men laughed. The omen was neutralized, but the practical difficulties were real. His enemy controlled the interior. Numidian cavalry under Labienus constantly harassed his forces, attacking foragers, cutting off supplies, preventing Caesar from moving freely. Caesar's men were sometimes reduced to eating seaweed and grass mixed with the little grain they could find. The army was not in danger of immediate destruction, but it was being ground down, unable to fight a decisive battle, unable to resupply easily, facing an enemy content to wait. Caesar drilled his men constantly during this period, keeping morale high through activity and discipline. He inspected every position personally. He was visible to his soldiers every day. A general who shared his soldiers' hardships was a general whose soldiers would follow him anywhere. In January 46 BC, Caesar's forces were ambushed near the town of Ruspina. He had taken approximately 30 cohorts, perhaps 15,000 men, on a foraging mission. Labienus hit them with a massive cavalry force supported by light infantry and Numidian skirmishers. Caesar's column was surrounded on open ground. The situation was critical. Labienus's forces formed a circle around Caesar's men, attacking from all sides simultaneously, withdrawing when the Romans turned to face them, never allowing a decisive engagement. Caesar ordered his men to extend their line into a circle, facing outward in all directions. Then he ordered alternating cohorts to charge at the surrounding forces, breaking the encirclement at multiple points simultaneously. It worked. Caesar extracted his forces from the trap, reaching the town of Ruspina and its defensive walls. He had escaped a potentially catastrophic defeat through tactical improvisation under extreme pressure. Labienus, who knew Caesar's methods better than almost any other Roman commander, having served under him for years in Gaul, had nearly destroyed him. Caesar would not be caught in open ground again. After Ruspina, Caesar changed his approach. He fortified his coastal position and began the methodical process of expanding his control, building camps, connecting them with fortified lines, gradually creating a defensive network that protected his supply lines while denying the enemy freedom of movement. It was the same approach he had used brilliantly against the Gauls at Alesia, where he had simultaneously besieged a fortified position while building an outer ring of fortifications to defend against a relief army. Reinforcements began arriving from Rome and other provinces. His cavalry was finally delivered, including Germanic horsemen who were among the finest cavalry in the Roman world. His army grew. His enemy's coalition, large but unwieldy, dependent on keeping together forces with different loyalties and command structures, began showing strength. And Caesar found what he had been looking for, a location where his tactical superiority could be brought to bear: the plains near a town called Thapsus. The Battle of Thapsus in April 46 BC was one of Caesar's most decisive victories. The Pompeian coalition deployed with war elephants on both flanks, a standard formation designed to panic Roman infantry and cavalry. Caesar had prepared for this. He placed his most experienced veterans, the 5th Legion, on the right flank specifically to deal with the elephants. He also had his own small force of elephants, trained beforehand to accustom his horses and men to the animals. What happened next became famous in Roman military history. Before Caesar even gave the order to advance, his veteran soldiers moved forward on their own. The legions had been sitting in the African sun, waiting for battle for weeks. They were done waiting. Caesar later claimed a sudden epileptic episode may have briefly incapacitated him at this moment, though some historians doubt this account. Either way, his veterans didn't need him. They crashed into the Pompeian line with controlled fury. The elephants panicked and turned back on their own side. The coalition army collapsed. The Battle of Thapsus became a massacre. Caesar's veterans, battle-hardened soldiers who had been harassed, ambushed, and starved for months, showed little mercy. Ancient sources describe Caesar desperately trying to stop his men from killing surrendered enemies, physically interposing himself between his soldiers and prisoners. His men reportedly ignored him. The death toll among the Pompeian forces was enormous. Metellus Scipio attempted to escape by sea and killed himself when his ship was intercepted. King Juba I of Numidia, whose kingdom was now forfeit, arranged a remarkable end for himself. He fled to a town whose inhabitants refused to open their gates. Unable to enter the town, unwilling to surrender, Juba arranged a gladiatorial combat with his Roman ally Marcus Petreius. They fought each other. Juba won, then killed himself, a king who refused to be captured, arranging his own death with characteristic North African dignity. His kingdom of Numidia was absorbed into Rome as the province of Africa Nova. After Thapsus, one figure remained, the most philosophically significant of Caesar's opponents. Cato the Younger had held the city of Utica in North Africa throughout the campaign. Cato was not primarily a military man. He was a stoic philosopher and politician who represented, more than any other figure, the ideal of the Roman Republic, the belief that Rome should be governed by law and the Senate, not by powerful individuals like Caesar. When news of Thapsus arrived, Cato's associates urged him to flee or seek terms from Caesar. Caesar had made it known he was willing to pardon Cato. Cato refused the pardon. To accept Caesar's mercy, he believed, was to accept Caesar's right to grant it, to acknowledge that one man had the authority to decide who lived and who died in Rome. Cato could not do that. He spent his last evening reading Plato's Phaedo, a philosophical dialogue on the immortality of the soul. Then he killed himself. Caesar, when he heard, reportedly said, "Cato, I grudge you your death, as you have grudged me the opportunity of saving your life." The last true republican was gone. With the military campaign concluded, Caesar turned to administration. He was systematic and relatively merciful by ancient standards. Local rulers who had supported the Pompeian coalition but surrendered were generally pardoned and allowed to keep their positions, sometimes with reduced territory or tribute payments to Rome. The Kingdom of Numidia was reorganized as a Roman province, the first major expansion of direct Roman control in North Africa since the destruction of Carthage a century earlier. Caesar assessed fines on cities that had supported his enemies, replacing capital punishment with financial penalties wherever possible. He also made time for something characteristically Caesar. He investigated the tides of the ocean, the Atlantic coast of North Africa, which Romans found mysterious because Mediterranean tides are minimal and Atlantic tides were dramatic and puzzling. Even in the middle of organizing a conquered territory, Caesar's intellectual curiosity could not be suppressed. He was simultaneously a general, a politician, an administrator, and a natural philosopher, the most complete Roman who ever lived. Caesar returned to Rome in July 46 BC. He celebrated 4 triumphs. The formal Roman military celebration involving a procession through Rome, display of captives and plunder, and religious ceremonies. The 4 triumphs represented his 4 major campaigns: Gaul, Egypt, Pontus in Asia Minor, and Africa. The African triumph displayed the captured Juba II, the infant son of King Juba I, paraded through Rome as evidence of the king's defeat. This child, whose father had died rather than surrender, would eventually become one of Rome's most valued client kings, ruling North Africa as a loyal Roman ally and becoming one of the ancient world's most learned scholars. Also displayed during the triumph, in a moment of extraordinary cruelty, was Arsinoe, Cleopatra's captured sister. Ancient sources say the Roman crowd, seeing a young woman in chains, felt pity and wept. Caesar later released Arsinoe to exile at the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, responding to the crowd's reaction. She would survive until Cleopatra eventually had her killed years later. During the period following his return, Caesar installed Cleopatra in his villa across the Tiber River. She came with her court, her son Caesarion, and all the sophisticated luxury of the Ptolemaic royal household. Rome was fascinated and scandalized simultaneously. Caesar was married to Calpurnia. Romans had complex feelings about foreign queens. Cleopatra was brilliant, exotic, powerful, and completely self-possessed. She gave audiences to Roman scholars and philosophers. She discussed mathematics and astronomy with the leading intellectuals of Rome. She was not intimidated by Rome. She was studying it, understanding the city that ruled the world, so that she could use that understanding to protect her own kingdom and dynasty. Caesar, meanwhile, was reorganizing the Roman state, reforming the calendar, planning massive building projects, expanding Roman citizenship, reorganizing provincial administration. He was moving in the direction that his enemies most feared, not just toward permanent power, but toward monarchy. The word Romans used, the word that made Roman aristocrats reach for their daggers, was rex, king. On the 15th of March, 44 BC, the Ides of March, Julius Caesar attended a Senate meeting. He had been warned not to go. His wife Calpurnia had dreamed of his death. Soothsayers had warned him. Friends had urged caution. Caesar dismissed the warnings. He walked into the Senate. A group of approximately 60 senators had conspired to kill him, men who called themselves the Liberatores, the Liberators. The most famous were Marcus Junius Brutus, whose family lineage included the founder of the Roman Republic, and whom Caesar had treated with particular favor, and Gaius Cassius Longinus. As Caesar took his seat, the conspirators surrounded him under the pretense of presenting a petition. One senator grabbed his toga. The first dagger struck. Caesar pulled his toga over his face as the blows fell. 23 stab wounds. He fell at the base of a statue of Pompey, the man who had defeated Pompey in civil war, who had chased him to Egypt, who had wept at his severed head, died at Pompey's feet. The African chapter of Caesar's story is essential to understanding who he became. In Egypt, he saw what absolute monarchy looked like, a divine ruler over the richest kingdom in the world, with resources and authority that Roman politicians could barely imagine. He saw the Library of Alexandria and understood that knowledge, accumulated and organized, was itself a form of power. He sailed the Nile and understood why whoever controlled Egypt controlled the Mediterranean economy. He met Cleopatra, and in her found an intellectual and political equal unlike anyone Rome had produced. In North Africa, he proved that his military genius was not limited to the forests of Gaul. He could fight in desert. He could fight in cities. He could fight outnumbered, undersupplied, in unfamiliar terrain, against enemies who knew the ground better than he did. And he won, every time. Africa gave Caesar a vision of what power could truly look like, unrestrained by Senate, unchecked by Republican tradition, backed by divine sanction and absolute wealth. Whether that vision inspired his final push toward monarchy, and therefore his assassination, is the question that historians have debated ever since.